Classroom. And I'm your African History Classroom host, Professor Hicks, and wonderful to see you again. Well, welcome to another day in America and our wonderful king. Things going steadily downhill. But we hope always hoping for the best. Just a quick commentary on the state of affairs as relates to the young lady that was killed in Minnesota. I cannot express more deeper condolences for that young lady and her family, and for my family. Really deeply felt tragedy. I'm sure everyone in the country right now who is, would probably concur. But with that said, this is the African History Classroom. And we need to take incidents, events, histories, and experience and look at them for what they are. And I said to my wife this morning, this killing is unfortunate, premeditated in my book. It's unfortunate. But there's another side to this family that we must consider and keep in mind. You're not being insensitive to do this, and what I'm going to say. It is not insensitive. It is history. It is something in the form of a lesson for everyone to learn or to look at and learn from. And that is European Americans, YTs, are getting an experience or feeling an experience that we as African people who have been in the bowels of America, that we have been experiencing for 400 years. And more recently, many of the killings that have taken place in our communities, mostly, I guess I would be referring to the ones by police officers, some of the blatant, some of the unexplained, some of the right in your face, but a different outcome. I think many of our YT Americans are beginning to feel our position and how difficult it is to rationalize, to make sense of this, to make sense of nonsense, to make sense of nothing, to make sense of insanity. Because our communities have suffered like this for many years and so many times. So, I say to the family, and America is starting to wake up to our reality. And it's unfortunate it has to be such a vehicle, but whatever it is, that's the way Ma'at works. And we have to accept it. It's like we accept the good with the bad or the bad with the good. This is reality. This is living. So, again, let's move on. So we left off at a juncture where we were just getting into the actual understanding of PTSS as Dr. Jagura, who has developed and presented us with this new concept of post-traumatic slave syndrome. And my last reading, we talked about how it relates to trauma. That trauma is an injury that is caused by an outside, usually a violent or a force event or experience. And why is that important? Because as you know, this series of discussions are centering around the semi-quicentennial that's going to be coming up on July 2026, July 4th, celebrating the Union of America through the Declaration of Independence signing. The story of the Revolutionary War, which pretty much is the precursor and the motivation behind the signing, has been depicting and will be depicting all types of events and histories that have taken place between 1776 and right now, 2026, which I believe comes out to 250 years. As such, we need to tell our role in this or coming up to the signing. What role did we play? Why were we included or excluded? What were some of the stories of the men and women in our time, our folks who look like us? What are some of the stories they experienced during the American Revolution? And what are the stories, or some of the stories they might have to tell us about the Declaration of Signing? Who did the Declaration of Signing leave in its waste? And who did it pick up? Well, all these questions, hopefully, we can answer over the next couple of weeks. I'll be sort of this week. I've been into this topic for now for about 4 or 5 days. So today I'm going to try to get it into. Let's move it to the middle, and hopefully by next week we'll end this and go into another topic. But this is important because the experience of the slave and the enslaved has manifested itself unto today. Let me be more specific. The behaviors of the enslaved and the behavior of the enslaver have symptoms to it. And as such, those symptoms have been manifested into behaviors that we used back then but are present and manifested here today in the here and now. So as African Americans being able to deal with this experience, this trauma, how have we done so? How has the trauma that we experienced during slavery, the repeated trauma, the trauma that happened time and time again in so many different levels, spiritually, economically, socially, physically, how do those traumas manifest themselves within us today? Well, they do. And many of these trauma manifestations show themselves in behaviors. And sometimes we as African people don't even understand why we are exhibiting or demonstrating these behaviors. These behaviors we see in our young people today in our communities in the most destructive ways. So that's why we want to talk and have a discussion about this. So as moving forward, we can begin to heal. We can begin to heal this trauma. Dr. Gruhl, about 15 years ago, has taken on this massive, massive undertaking to heal us. She's a psychotherapist, she's a psychologist, a doctor. And she's written a wonderful book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, for those who haven't been with me. And I will be using her book as a basis to move forward on this, understanding these experiences, the trauma, and the manifestation of this trauma and behavior, as well as what we can do to heal. Yes, there will be the final portion of this series. We'll be talking about how to heal. But first, let's talk about what we have. So the name of this topic has been Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, PTSS. And I'm going to take off where we left off, and that was what trauma was. And just one more time what trauma is, for those who might be joining us. Trauma is an injury that's caused by an outside event. It can usually be violent, mostly violent. It could be a force too. It can be an experience as well. So we experience this injury physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and physiologically. This is very important. And hopefully I mentioned psychologically, because that is the crux of everything we're trying to get through today. Traumas can upset our equilibrium, how we live, how we feel, and our sense of well-being, whether we feel we hear or not. If a trauma is severe enough, it can distort our attitudes and beliefs. Such distortions often result in dysfunctional behaviors, which can in turn produce unwanted consequences. Unwanted consequences. And this is just what is happening with our young folks, because this is basically who I'm trying to reach, though I know my audience is not one of young folks, but for maybe one or two people who get this and has some of this they see in their family, they might be able to begin to heal these friends, these people. So, trauma, I should say lastly, is an experience that can result in distorted attitudes, dysfunctional behaviors, and I mentioned unwanted consequences. This pattern is magnified exponentially when a person repeatedly experiences these traumas, as we did in slavery, And it is much worse. Trauma is much worse when it is caused by human beings. I wonder why. Why is trauma much worse when it's caused by human beings? I believe that trauma is worse because we ourselves are socialized and developed from young infants to adulthood that there is something called good and bad behavior. And many of the things our parents socialize us to, what is good behavior, is pretty much what most people lean towards. So we can simply say without much scientific evidence that most people want to be good. Understanding that, and as you develop into an adult, and all of a sudden you experience some sort of traumatic behavior or some trauma, and this trauma affects you, it becomes more embedded in you when you see, based on your socialization of most people are good, when you see a human being committing these atrocious acts. So the answer as to why it is more affected to you or affects you when a human being is doing it, because most of us are socialized to believe that human beings do good things. We've mostly seen in our lives human beings do good things. So when we see such an event, some atrocity committed on another human being or yourself, it becomes that more affective. AFFECTIV, affective, with the emotions, affecting your emotions. The slave experience was one of continual violent attacks on the slave's body, mind, and spirit. Slave men, women, and children were traumatized throughout their entire lives, from infant to adult. And violent attacks during slavery persisted even long after emancipation. So we're not just talking about the captive behavior, but even when emancipated, the behavior continued. Repeated, remember what we said in the beginning? Repeated behaviors as such or traumas are exponentially more dastardly on you. And of course, when they're done by a human being. In the face of all these injuries and these traumas, people, as well as all, not just all human beings, have to find a way to adapt. Adaptation. Matter of fact, let me just take a second to say most people believe that intelligence is based on IQ and it developed. That is not intelligence. Intelligent quotient or IQ does not measure any form of success. And I beg to say, after all the tests, and my degree was in psychology, and all the tests in things that I've done, I never seen where it was proved anything except for people who the test was built for, and that is mostly Europeans. The true test for intelligence is your ability to adapt to your environment. Yes. And you need no more evidence than to look at people of color, black people. Because Africa was such a crucible of training and learning to adapt and survive in the early years shows a very large extent of intelligence. So the ability to adapt in the face of this trauma every day, persistent, coming at you physically, spiritually, and emotionally, you had to adapt. And to adapt, you had to find different mechanisms to do that. And just to continue to remember, this is now you're a captive and you're trying to adapt to survive. In the face of all these injuries, those traumatized, adaptive, those traumatized, I'm going to be very clear, so I'll be stopping and slowing down. Those traumatized adapted their attitudes and behaviors to simply survive. And these adaptations continue to manifest themselves today. Post-traumatic slave syndrome examines these adaptations with an eye towards identifying today those that limit us, those adaptations that are limiting us, and those that make us stronger. Yes, the adaptations we're going to talk about mainly look like they inhibit us and they destroy us, and they have been destroying us. But there's a way to mitigate them and to make them healthy for us, because remember, at one time these adaptations helped us and protected us to live. It protected us to be able to adapt to the slave environment and all of its consequences. Okay, so let's take a moment. Let's take a moment. Excuse myself. Okay. Thank you, Vance. I had to turn down my radio. Okay. All right, so again, we're trying to examine this post-traumatic slave syndrome. We want to examine it so that we can find the adaptations that we made with an eye towards identifying these adaptations as they have manifested themselves in behaviors. And then we want to take those that have helped us in the past, that protected us, but we also want to limit the ones that do not protect us today. The adaptations that we made in the environment of slavery are today manifested in our behaviors. Some of these behaviors are good for us. Many of them are bad for us. All right. Let me see if I can get this into a few examples, okay? And I'm kind of reading and paraphrasing, so stay with me. Got another 5 minutes. Now view, PTSS, now viewed through the historical lens of slavery and its aftermath, one may better understand the hesitancy of African Americans, mothers, to acknowledge the fine qualities of their children. Let me say that again, and I'll give you an example of what we're talking about. Now viewed through the historical lens, when you look at this adaptive behavior, this post-traumatic slave syndrome through the historical lens and its aftermath after slavery, one may better understand the hesitancy of African American mothers to acknowledge the fine qualities of their children. When we roll the scene back a few hundred years, we see a slave master walking through the fields, coming upon a slave woman. The slave master approaches her and her children, and the slave master approaches her and her children and remarks, "Well now, Mary, that child of yours is really coming along. I see he's growing big and strong. He listens well and doing a very good job in the field." The slave mother might receive another such warning. She has a wonderful, beautiful slave daughter. And the slave daughter is right now, as far as the slave master is concerned, for a nice little sexual encounter. The slave mother is terrified that the slave master might see these wonderful qualities in her son and these sexual qualities in her daughter, and begins to say things like, in response to the slave master, "Nah, sir, she ain't worth nothing. She can't work." Might say towards her son, "Nah, master, he's stupid. He ain't doing nothing. He can't work." The slave mother's denigrating remarks and statements about her daughter and son, spoken in an effort to dissuade the slave master from molesting the daughter, or maybe selling the son. And this behavior no one would falter to do if we were there on that plantation watching. It was nothing special. They protected us that way. The mother would constantly degrade the daughter, denigrate her, and of course put down the son. Those are adaptive behaviors that our ancestors used in order for us to survive on the plantation. The slave mother's denigrating statements about her daughter and about the son, spoken in an effort to dissuade the slave master from molesting or selling the son. This behavior was nothing special. Slave mothers and fathers had been belittling their children in an effort to protect them for hundreds of years. Yet, what originally began as an appropriate adaptation to an oppressive and danger-filled environment has been subsequently transmitted down through the generations. Yes, like wearing a fur coat in the summertime, like trying to cross a river with a boat on your back when there's no more water. These behaviors that have transmitted themselves down through generations are evident and manifested today in some of the maladaptive behaviors of our youth. Okay, so before we come back to this, we're going to come back to what you see as hypervigilance, and we're going to come back to this, and I want you to look at it for a moment right now. As I'm reading this, just look at these things, because this is what I want you to do. That question says, do you do any of this? Yes. Do you do any of this? Because this is one of the adaptive behaviors. This is one of the adaptive behaviors that we transmitted down from slavery to today. And remember, these behaviors originally were appropriate adaptations for slavery environment to stay alive in that danger-filled environment. It is evidence today by behaviors like those exhibited by the black woman and the ones that I described to you, while on the surface seemingly harmless, such behaviors serve to both humiliate and injure young black children. Let me give you an example how that injures young black. I remember being with my mom in certain places in the public, and I would attempt to go and play and run and play whatever, and my mother would snatch me by her side. Don't you move here, boy. Stay next to me. Don't you go nowhere. And then I might look around and see some other kids playing, particularly the white kids, and wonder why I had to stay here and they were allowed to play like they were. And I'm sure many of you have the experience of watching white kids when they're in public places. I mean, they just do anything. And we sit there going, why? Why are they behaving like that? Why they be so free, running around and do things? I know I've seen white kids do that and almost jealous. Well, I want you to think about that in the slave environment. Think about allowing your children to run, frolic, and play leisurely in a slave environment. What might happen? Let me better say, what could happen? He could run and trip over the slave master, and the slave master strike him down and shoot him right there. The slave master might think he's getting a little too big for himself to even play like that. Maybe it's inappropriate. Maybe the slave master is one of cruel. His behavior is one of real cruelty, and doesn't accept any type of behavior that is other than a slave, no matter how old you are, no matter what gender you are. Mama had to protect us. So she told the slave master, she told you, stay next to me, boy. She'd tell me because it was dangerous for me to go out there. It was dangerous for me to be at leisure as the white kids, because I might cross somebody and then my mother and I would be in danger. Particularly if you lived in the South, particularly. And many of these things happened to me when I was South with my mom. So now I get it, and I didn't then. But that's the adaptation. We got to see how that adaptation affects us today. All right, let me finish off today, folks. We got another 5 minutes. It is not hard, like it was for me, to imagine the impact of these painful and vilifying remarks on the self-esteem of many black children, because I know it happened to me, especially when one considers the years of repetition. Sadly, neither the black mother nor her children understand the historical forces that have helped to shape her behavior. With the same historical lens, one can better understand why the mother and your mother insisted that the children stay near her. In the slave environment and continuing through Reconstruction and the long night of Jim Crow, it was inherently unsafe. Let me say that again. It was inherently unsafe for a black child to stray, wander, or question white people. Such behavior could result in severe ramifications, punishment, or even death. I just alluded to that a moment ago. Thus, black slaves, black slaves were hyper vigilant about the whereabouts of their children. Remember that term, hyper vigilant about the whereabouts of their children because they knew it meant survival. Okay. Finally, now we're going to talk about how this works in groups of people and black men and women in groups who are working together. It is equally understandable why an African American might feel threatened by the accomplishments of his peers or her peers, viewed only in the light of slavery in the lens of slavery. Slaves were divided into many different respects. Masters distinguished house slaves from the field slave, the mulatto from the black slave. Often these designations meant access to or denial of certain privileges, and sometimes it meant freedom itself. It was a common practice for slave owners to set one class of slave against another. Slave owners perpetuated feelings of separateness and distrust by sometimes ordering black overseers to beat or punish their friends, their peers, and sometimes even their relatives. When the master promoted a slave, that slave was often joined in the ranks of the oppressor. Let me say that one more time. When the master promoted a slave, that slave often joined the master in the rank of the oppressor. There are just a few examples of behaviors that have roots in slavery, or should I say, these are just a few examples, and have been passed down through generations. Most of them ensured our survival at one time or another. Some of them will inhibit our ability to survive and thrive today, particularly if they are not brought to light, examined, and where necessary, replaced with behaviors which promote and maximize our progress. Folks, this is the gist of this series. This is a psychological aspect of slavery, of course, as it relates to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. These behaviors impacted directly the signing of the independence, the end of the American Revolutionary War, and the subsequent union of our nation. We will see as we get to the end of the series how important it is to understand the psychological, emotional, and spiritual impact of enslavement. Okay, so I'm going to give you finally the last paragraph, and this is, remember, this is Dr. DeGroove's book. We already mentioned these are just a few examples that we use of the adaptive behaviors we use that got us here. The primary purpose of this book is to encourage African Americans to view their attitudes, assumptions, and behaviors through the lens of history, and so gain a greater understanding of the impact centuries of slavery and oppression has had on our lives. This is why it's important. What does Professor Small say? We want to get the mystery out of the history, or take the history to learn about the mystery. This is why African Americans is so important for you to learn your history. Identity is the only thing we have left. They have stripped our culture of mostly everything. Watching social platforms, watching our women, our beautiful women on stage, twerking and wearing the hair of the Europeans and the lips and it saddens me because we don't know our history. Watching the young men who are out there, more interested in the sexual achievements and gratifications. than we are about our history. But our history is what's going to save us. Because as they say in Sankofa, you have to look back into your old traditions, like every other culture does. We are the only ones that don't want to know our history. But you must look back into your culture and bring and use those things that help our ancestors get us here, and we must emulate some of those things. Kick out the ones we don't need so that we can become better than we were yesterday. And that's what this is about. With this understanding, we can explore the role of our history has played in the evolution of our thoughts, feelings, and our beliefs, and who and what we are, as well as our beliefs about who and what our behaviors are. While it is true that some of this evolution has resulted in behaviors that have become both destructive and maladaptive, it is also encouraging that in spite of the oppressive conditions our ancestors endured, they were able to pass on their phenomenal powers of resilience and adaptability, their intelligence. So it is essential that we build upon these strengths in ways that will sustain and advance future generations. In this way, we can begin the process of healing. Dr. Joy DeGruy. And with that said, folks, we're going to end with what you see. For those who are looking at this, I want you to look at the examples of behavior, this hypervigilance that we used in slavery to adapt us to survival. Do you do any of this? Particularly men, black men. I want you to look at these. I'm going to leave these posted. Hopefully it will be posted to my page, and it'll be the first page that you see, because you need to find out if you are doing any of these things here, you are suffering what Dr. Joy DeGruy calls post-traumatic slave syndrome. We all suffer from it. So whether you have one or two of these, you do. Now you know where at least it comes from, and you can begin to examine. Speak to your parents. Speak to yourself. How are you parenting? Do you parent like this? Do you have to keep your child next to you wherever they go? Are you still protecting your child from the slave master in 2026? Very important. So ask yourself these and many other good questions that are going to help us healing, because ultimately we're going to use this series to heal and to learn. And with that said, I'm going to say Ashe, and have a rest of the wonderful evening that the Creator